sorry to bother you.
I only wanted to ask if you had any water.
Please. Eat.
No, I couldn't.
You can have mine too.
Why would you give away your last meal?
People need kindness more than food.
We'll be okay. Dad, why would the biggest ranch in Texas send us a letter?
The day I shared my last meal with a stranger, I thought I was making a small sacrifice. I had no idea that woman owned more land, money, and power than anyone else in Texas. It was late afternoon when everything changed. Dark clouds had been gathering over the plains for hours, and by the time I finished loading my horse trailer, the wind had already begun carrying the smell of rain. The trip into town had been a failure. I had spent the entire day trying to sell one of my young horses. A good horse, strong, healthy, the kind that should have sold easily. But sometimes life doesn't care about what should happen. The buyer changed his mind. The deal collapsed. And by the time Emma and I climbed back into my old truck, all we had left was enough money for one simple meal. Emma didn't complain. She never did. At 8 years old, she already understood things most adults never learn. Some months were easier than others. Some weren't. That evening was one of the difficult ones. We stopped at a small roadside diner just outside town. I bought the cheapest meal they had. 1 container of chicken stew, 2 pieces of bread, enough for Emma and me to share. As we drove home through the Texas countryside, the first drops of rain began hitting the windshield. Then Emma suddenly pointed through the passenger window. "Dad." I slowed the truck. Standing beside the road was a woman, alone. She wore old clothes covered in dust and mud. Her boots looked worn through. Her hair was damp from the approaching storm. She wasn't waving. She wasn't asking for help. She simply stood there, waiting, or perhaps hoping. Most cars drove past without slowing down. I pulled over. When I stepped out, the wind had already become cold. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She looked at me for a moment before answering. Her voice was quiet. "I'm sorry to bother you. I only wanted to ask if you had any water. That was all. Not money, not a ride, just water." I reached into the truck and handed her the bottle we had left. She thanked me. Then I noticed something. The way she looked at the container of food sitting between Emma and me. Not greed, not shame, just hunger. Real hunger. The kind you recognize when you've known difficult times yourself. I looked at Emma. She looked at me. Neither of us needed to say anything. I opened the container, broke 1 piece of bread in half, and handed her my portion. "Please, eat." The woman's eyes widened. "No, I couldn't." "You should." For a second I thought she might refuse. Then Emma surprised both of us. She reached forward and handed over her own portion, too. "You can have mine." The woman stared at her. "But what about you?" Emma smiled. "We'll be okay." I watched tears form in the woman's eyes. She sat quietly on the tailgate of my truck and ate slowly, carefully, as though she hadn't shared a meal with anyone in a very long time. The storm grew stronger around us, but for a few minutes, none of us seemed to notice. When she finished, she stood and handed me back the empty container. "Why?" She asked it so softly I almost didn't hear her. "Why would you give away your last meal?" I looked toward Emma, then back at the woman, and I answered with the only truth I knew. Because sometimes people need kindness more than food. For several seconds, she simply stared at us. Then she smiled. Not the smile of someone receiving charity, the smile of someone remembering something important. She thanked us one last time, then disappeared into the rain. The next morning, I woke up believing I'd helped a stranger. By sunset, I would discover that stranger had never been who she claimed to be. My name is Jacob Miller. I'm 42 years old, and for most of my life I've believed that a man's wealth has very little to do with the amount of money in his bank account. If that weren't true, I would have considered myself poor a long time ago. I'm a cowboy, a rancher, a father, and after losing my wife, I learned that some losses change the way you measure everything else. My ranch sits on a small piece of land outside town. Nothing impressive. A few horses, a handful of cattle, a barn that always seems to need another repair. Some months are better than others. Some months you fix the fence on Monday and wonder how you'll pay the electric bill on Friday. That's ranch life. You learn to accept uncertainty. You learn to work harder. And eventually you learn that pride doesn't feed horses. Hard work does. Fortunately, I never had to do it alone. I had Emma. My daughter is 8 years old, and somehow she inherited every good thing her mother ever had. She loves horses with a kind of devotion most people reserve for family. Maybe because to her, they are family. She talks to them, reads stories beside them. Sometimes I think they understand her better than most adults do. But the thing Emma inherited most from Sarah wasn't her love of animals. It was her kindness. The kind of kindness that doesn't ask questions first. The kind that doesn't calculate costs. The kind that simply sees someone hurting and decides to help. Sarah was exactly the same way. Years ago, when Emma was still a baby, we were driving home one winter evening when Sarah noticed an elderly man standing beside a broken truck. We didn't have much money back then, either. Actually, we had almost none. But Sarah still insisted we stop. We spent 3 hours helping that stranger get home. When I asked her why she always did things like that, she smiled and said something I've never forgotten. You'll never become poor by sharing kindness. At the time I laughed. It sounded beautiful, but unrealistic. Life eventually proved she was right. After Sarah passed away, there were days when I thought I had lost everything. The future we planned, the life we built, the person who made every difficult day easier. But somehow, every act of kindness we had shared remained. People showed up. Neighbors helped. Friends stayed. Strangers offered support. Sarah's kindness kept returning to us long after she was gone. So I made a promise. Not to myself, to her. I would teach Emma never to ignore someone who needed help. No matter how difficult life became, no matter how little we had, which is exactly why neither of us hesitated when we saw that woman standing beside the road. The morning after we shared our last meal with her, I woke before sunrise. The ranch still needed work. The horses still needed feeding. Life didn't stop simply because we'd done something kind. I was repairing a section of fencing when I heard Emma shouting from the house, "Dad!" Her voice carried excitement and confusion. I walked inside. She was standing beside the kitchen table holding a large envelope. I didn't recognize the seal, but I immediately recognized the name printed across the front, Whitmore Ranch. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Emma looked up at me. "Dad, why would the biggest ranch in Texas send us a letter?" Honestly, I had no idea, but something deep inside me told me that the woman we had met on the side of that road had not disappeared into the storm. In fact, I had a feeling we were about to discover who she really was. I must have read the letter from Whitmore Ranch at least 5 times. The message itself was surprisingly simple. No explanation, no details, just an invitation. Eleanor Whitmore requested that Emma and I visit the Whitmore Ranch at 10 o'clock the following morning. That was it. No reason, no context, no clue why one of the most powerful people in Texas wanted to meet a struggling cowboy and his 8-year-old daughter. Emma was excited. I was suspicious. Not because I expected trouble, because life had taught me that unexpected opportunities usually arrived carrying unexpected problems. Still, curiosity won. The next morning, we drove across nearly 2 hours of Texas countryside before the entrance gates of Whitmore Ranch finally appeared. I had heard stories about the place my entire life. None of them did it justice. The ranch stretched farther than I could see. Thousands of acres, rolling hills, perfect fences, historic barns, more horses than I had ever seen gathered in one place. Emma pressed her face against the truck window. "Dad, do people really live like this?" I smiled. "I guess some do." As we approached the main house, several employees greeted us. They already knew our names. That made me even more uncomfortable. One of them escorted us inside. Then everything suddenly made sense. Standing in the center of the room was the woman from the roadside. The same woman. The same eyes. The same smile. The only difference was that she was no longer wearing muddy boots and worn clothes. She stood there dressed as exactly who she really was. Eleanor Whitmore, owner of the largest ranch in the state, heiress to one of the wealthiest ranching families in America. A billionaire? For several seconds I simply stared. Emma looked at me, then at Eleanor, then back at me. "Dad, that's the lady." Eleanor smiled softly. "Yes, it is." I wish I could say I handled the revelation with dignity. I didn't. I was confused, embarrassed, and honestly, a little angry. "You lied." She nodded. "I did." I crossed my arms. "Why?" For the first time since we'd entered the room, her smile disappeared. She looked tired, not physically, emotionally. "My father died 3 months ago." I said nothing. Everyone in Texas had heard about William Whitmore. She continued. "After he died, I started wondering something." She looked toward the window. "I wondered if people still helped others when there was nothing to gain." The room became very quiet. She explained that she had spent an entire day traveling through nearby towns, dressed as an ordinary woman. No security, no assistance, no expensive clothes, no famous last name. Just herself. Or perhaps the version of herself nobody ever saw. She asked people for directions, for water, for help. Most ignored her. Some avoided her. A few offered polite excuses before walking away. Then she met us. She smiled at Emma. "You gave me your food." Emma shrugged. "You looked hungry." That answer nearly made Eleanor cry. She laughed softly and wiped her eyes. "Do you know how many people shared something with me that day?" Emma shook her head. "How many?" Eleanor smiled. "2. She looked directly at us. "You. And your father." For a moment nobody spoke. All the wealth in Texas suddenly felt very small compared to that answer. Then another voice interrupted us. "Mom?" A young boy stood in the doorway, about Emma's age, dark hair, curious eyes, a little shy. "Noah," Eleanor said gently, "come meet our guests." He walked slowly into the room. Emma smiled first. "Do you like horses?" He nodded. "A lot." "Me too." That was all it took. Within minutes they disappeared outside together to visit the stables. Children rarely need long explanations to become friends. Sometimes they simply decide. I watched them run across the yard and realized something strange. For the first time since Sarah died, I had heard Emma laugh that way. Really laugh. The kind of laugh that comes from feeling completely safe. I should have been happy, and I was. But as I looked back toward Eleanor, I noticed something else. Several people standing near the entrance were watching us. Not smiling, not happy. One of them in particular never took his eyes off me. And somehow, I already knew that not everyone at Whitmore Ranch was pleased that Eleanor had found us. I should have known it wouldn't stay simple. Life rarely rewards kindness without testing it first. For a few days after Emma and I visited Whitmore Ranch, everything felt almost unreal. Emma talked about Noah constantly. Noah apparently did the same. They wrote notes to each other, drew pictures of horses together, made plans to ride every horse on the ranch before the end of summer, and for the first time in years, I found myself looking forward to something beyond the next bill, the next repair, or the next difficult month. Then Victor Kane introduced himself. Officially, he was one of the Whitmore family's largest investors. Unofficially, everyone knew he had spent years trying to become something more. A business partner, an advisor, a husband. He was wealthy, powerful, and until recently, he seemed convinced that Eleanor Whitmore's future belonged to him. Then she spent one afternoon disguised as a stranger on the side of the road, and somehow, Emma and I became a problem. The first time I met Victor, he smiled. The kind of smile people use when they're trying to hide what they really think. He shook my hand, complimented my ranch, asked about Emma, praised my kindness. Then he looked directly into my eyes and said something I didn't understand at the time. Some opportunities change a person's life forever. I smiled politely. I suppose they do. He smiled back. I wonder if that's why you stopped that day. At first I thought it was an innocent question. Later I realized it wasn't. The rumors started shortly afterward, small at first. Whispers, questions, suggestions. People began asking whether I had somehow known who Eleanor really was. Others wondered if sharing my food had simply been an act, a performance, a calculated decision. The rumors grew. According to some versions of the story, I had researched Eleanor's movements. According to others, I had staged the entire encounter. By the end of the week, people I'd known for years were looking at me differently, not because they believed the rumors, because they didn't know what to believe. I tried to ignore it. Then someone sent me copies of several documents, bank statements, property records, supposed financial agreements, all carrying my name, all fake. The documents claimed I had discussed investment opportunities with individuals connected to Whitmore Ranch, months before I ever met Eleanor. Whoever created them had been careful, very careful, but not careful enough. The moment I held those papers, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The Texas Ranger inside me woke up. I stopped thinking like a rancher and started thinking like an investigator. Every forged document leaves behind fingerprints, not literal fingerprints, patterns, mistakes, assumptions. I spent nights reviewing signatures, printer marks, financial records, metadata. Then I started talking to people, quietly, discreetly. An old employee from one of Victor's companies agreed to meet me. Then another, and another. Each conversation revealed a little more. Victor had been paying people, not to tell the truth, to create a story. He had instructed employees to spread rumors. He had hired private investigators. He had even pressured former staff members at Whitmore Ranch to claim they had seen me asking questions about Eleanor long before we met. The lies were organized, funded, planned, and every road led back to Victor Kane. I could have fought. I could have exposed everything immediately. But then I looked at Emma, and I looked at Noah, and I looked at Eleanor. For the first time I understood what Victor really wanted. He didn't care about me. He cared about forcing Eleanor to make a choice, her ranch or me, and I refused to become another burden she had to carry. That evening, after Emma had fallen asleep, I sat alone on the porch watching the sun disappear over the pasture. I already knew what I had to do. The next morning, before anyone at Whitmore Ranch could stop me, I packed our truck. because sometimes the hardest thing a man can do is walk away from the people he cares about before they have to choose between him and everything else they love. I left before sunrise. No dramatic goodbye, no confrontation, no explanation. I simply packed the truck, loaded Emma's horse trailer, and drove away from Whitmore Ranch. Emma didn't ask many questions. She looked sad, confused, but she trusted me. Children often understand sacrifice before they understand the reasons behind it. For several days I returned to the only life I had ever truly known. Feeding horses, repairing fences, working until exhaustion left no room for thinking. I told myself I had done the right thing. Victor wanted Eleanor to choose between her ranch and me. I had removed myself from the equation. Simple. At least that's what I kept trying to believe. Then Sheriff Harper showed up. He climbed out of his truck, removed his hat, and looked at me the way people do when they're about to tell you something important. "You planning on staying hidden forever?" I smiled. "I'm not hiding." He handed me an envelope. "Then you might want to read this." It was a formal notice. A special meeting had been called at Whitmore Ranch. Board members, attorneys, employees, investors, community leaders, and apparently, me. I almost didn't go. Then I saw Emma sitting on the porch with one of Noah's letters in her hand. She wasn't crying, which somehow hurt even more. The next morning we drove back. The main hall of Whitmore Ranch was full. More people than I had ever seen gathered in one place. The entire board sat at the front. Attorneys occupied one side of the room. Employees lined the walls. Even local residents had arrived. And standing near the center of the room was Eleanor. She looked relieved the moment she saw us. Victor Kane looked less pleased. He smiled anyway. The meeting began with accusations. Again. Victor repeated every rumor, every lie, every forged story. He claimed I had manipulated Eleanor from the beginning, that I had staged our meeting, that I had targeted her wealth. Some people looked uncomfortable, others looked uncertain. Then Sheriff Harper nodded toward me. It was my turn. I carried a single box to the front of the room. Nothing dramatic, just evidence, old habits. I began with the forged financial documents, bank records, property agreements, investment proposals. One by one I explained every inconsistency, wrong dates, false signatures, accounts that never existed. Then came the printer records, the digital metadata, the financial transactions connecting the forgeries to companies owned by Victor Kane. The room became quieter with every document. Then the witnesses spoke. A former assistant testified that Victor had instructed employees to spread rumors about me. Another admitted being paid to claim she had seen me investigating Eleanor before our first meeting. A private investigator hired by Victor provided records showing months of surveillance on Eleanor's personal life. Victor's smile disappeared. But the worst revelation was still coming. An elderly attorney who had represented the Whitmore family for decades slowly stood. He carried several files, very old files. He looked directly at Eleanor. "There's something you deserve to know." The room became completely silent. He opened the first file, then the second, then the third. Each documented a relationship Eleanor had attempted to build after her father's death. Each relationship had ended mysteriously. Rumors, false accusations, financial concerns, scandals, every single time. The attorney looked toward Victor. The same investigator appears in every case. No one spoke. No one moved. He continued. For years, Mr. Kane systematically interfered with every serious relationship Miss Whitmore attempted to have. A woman in the back of the room gasped. Another employee began crying. Eleanor simply stared. Not at the documents, at Victor, as though she were seeing him for the first time. Victor finally stood. He tried to explain, to justify, to deny. But there was too much evidence, too many witnesses, too many years of manipulation finally exposed. Sheriff Harper stepped forward. Several investigators followed. Victor's business contracts with Whitmore Ranch were immediately suspended. A formal investigation into fraud, coercion, and financial misconduct was opened. And just like that, the man who had spent years trying to control Eleanor lost everything. The meeting ended in complete silence. People slowly began leaving. Some apologized. Others simply looked ashamed. I never waited for Eleanor. I never waited for anyone. I quietly walked back to my truck, loaded Emma's bags, started the engine, because despite everything that had happened, I still believed the best thing I could do for Eleanor was disappear. And so, without saying goodbye, I drove back toward my small ranch. What I didn't know was that Eleanor Whitmore had absolutely no intention of letting me leave her life again. 3 days after Victor Kane was removed from Whitmore Ranch, life returned to what most people would call ordinary. To me, ordinary had always been enough. I was repairing a fence near the southern pasture when I heard Emma shouting from the house. "Dad," I smiled. Emma only used that voice when something exciting had happened. I put down my tools and walked toward the porch. She was standing in the doorway, smiling so hard she could barely speak. "She's here." I didn't have to ask who. I already knew. A black pickup truck sat quietly in front of the house. Eleanor Whitmore stepped out. But she wasn't alone. Noah jumped out of the passenger side before the truck had even stopped moving. Emma immediately ran toward him. Within seconds they were laughing and racing toward the horse pasture, as though nothing difficult had ever happened. I stood there for a moment, watching, trying to find the right words. Eleanor solved the problem for me. She smiled. "I hope we're not interrupting." I laughed softly. "You drove 2 hours. I think that counts as a planned interruption." For the first time in weeks, she laughed. Not the polite laugh she used in meetings, a real one. Then she reached into the truck and pulled out something I never expected, a small paper bag and a cardboard food container. My smile disappeared, not because I was upset, because I recognized them. Chicken stew, 2 pieces of bread, the exact same meal Emma and I had shared with her that night on the side of the road. She walked onto the porch and carefully placed the food on the old wooden table. Then she looked at me. I never forgot this meal. I stared at the container for several seconds. Then I smiled. It wasn't much. She slowly shook her head. There were tears in her eyes. It was everything. For a while, neither of us spoke. The Texas wind moved gently across the fields. The horses grazed peacefully, and somewhere in the distance Emma and Noah were laughing, the kind of laughter that makes the world feel right again. Eventually, Eleanor sat down beside me. She looked toward the pasture, toward the children, then back at me. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." She took a deep breath. "Why did you help a stranger when you had almost nothing?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked toward Emma. She was feeding carrots to one of the horses while Noah laughed beside her. I thought about Sarah, about difficult years, about empty bank accounts, about everything we had lost and everything we had somehow managed to keep. Then I looked back at Eleanor. Because when you have very little, I smiled, you learn exactly how much kindness matters. She didn't speak. She simply reached over and held my hand, not because I had saved her, not because she was grateful, but because she understood. For the first time in a very long while, someone understood. As the sun began disappearing beyond the Texas hills, we walked together toward the pasture. Emma and Noah ran ahead of us. The horses raced across the fields beneath the golden light of sunset. No wealth, no titles, no billion-dollar ranches, no investigations, no lies. Just four people standing together beneath a Texas sky, and somehow that felt more valuable than anything money could buy. I looked at Eleanor, then at Emma, then at Noah, and finally, I understood something that had taken me years to learn. She spent one day pretending to be poor. I spent years learning what it meant, and somehow that was the only reason we ever found each other. If you had only one meal left, would you have shared it with a stranger? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoy stories about kindness, family, second chances, and cowboys who never give up, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story.